Hi, welcome to Parent Academy Real Talk. My name is Mary Beth Stapleton, and I'm Manager of Family and Community Partnerships for Harford County Public Schools. With me today are the Teacher of the Year Finalists for 2019, who joined us to talk about how we can support our children at home with their learning at home, knowing that that connection to home and school is so important. So to start us off, we're going to have a quick introduction of all of our Teachers of the Year finalists.
Hi, I'm Dawn Zippe. I'm an elementary instrumental music teacher at Ring Factory.
Paige Melanowski, drama, English, and reading teacher, grade 10 at Havre de Grace High School.
Becca Martinek, I teach biology at C. Milton Wright High School, 9th grade.
Kathleen Thompson, I'm the gifted and talented resource teacher at Joppatown and Ring Factory for grades K, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
I'm Kirsty Smith, and I teach 7th grade science at Edgewood Middle School.
Great. Thank you all for being here today. So first things first, as a parent of 4, I know it's such a challenge for parents to manage schoolwork and activities and everything else that we have going on during the day. So from a teacher's perspective, how do we manage that as parents? How do we want to encourage our kids to do activities and to do enrichment, but then also make sure that we focus on the schoolwork too? How do we balance that from a teacher's view?
I think a lot of it, as the special area teacher and someone who is having kids do that extracurricular piece, I think it's about being organized and having that communication piece, making sure that you know everything that your child is involved in, whether it is the school-based activities or it's your home extracurriculars, and being organized at it. In my own house, we have a little magnet board that has the days of the week, and every week on Sunday we sit and we kind of map out our week. Mm-hmm. And I put some things in there for my son to make sure that he's balancing, and he just knows to go check that. And I think that makes a big difference in just making him feel organized. Mm-hmm. It helps us as parents too.
So do you ever hear from kids, well, I couldn't get that done because I had football practice, mm-hmm. or because I had this or that, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think as a parent we struggle because we want to make our kids happy and make sure that they do all the activities they want to do, but then we also know that maybe sometimes things get pushed to the side because of that. So any thoughts on how we should manage that?
Well, I think parents, you are the biggest role model for your children, and I think it's important that you model what it's like to have your own schedule and to organize your events and prioritize, and that's going to help them later in life. So I think just being that strong role model to show your child what is right and what works and maybe what doesn't work and learn from those mistakes is very important.
I think, too, you need to know your child and what they can handle. Every child is different. As a mom myself, I know that 2 of my children are very organized and they're very on top of it, whereas 2 may not be as organized. So I need to make sure as a mom that I'm handling them and they're handling appropriately for them. So what might be a lot for one may be a breeze for the other, and vice versa.
And they can manage it. Yeah, they're all very, very different. I think as a parent, sometimes you think that emphasizing those activities may help future scholarships. Mm-hmm. For example, if you have an amazing football player or an amazing whatever, you think your child will, oh my gosh, we have to invest in this because they'll get a scholarship. But after having 4 children, I realized that's not always the case, right? And so we really do need to focus on those grades.
We do, and I think too we have to make sure that we're not overloading them with so much that they end up doing a mediocre job at a lot of activities. We're better off helping them, when they're younger, help them experiment and explore a couple of different activities and then start to hone in on what really is your interest, what is your passion, and how can you really then focus on that one particular thing and say, I'm going to invest my time and be really good at this. In addition, if you want that extracurricular piece to mm-hmm. go with, of course you need to have the academics that go with that too.
Yeah, and how about the reading at home? I mean, that's always hard because, I remember as a mom that we had it in the bedtime routine when they were little, but then as they got older, really trying to engage them in the reading, especially with the distraction of the screens.
It's so, so, so important for them to read and to talk about modeling behavior, to see parents reading and not our cell phone screens. And that starts with parents too. For myself, all the time, if I see myself on a phone, put it down, as a family, can we sit, can we read for just a little bit? I know I used to read to my kids every night when they were little. there is absolutely nothing wrong with asking them to read to you when they're bigger.
Oh, okay.
My kids read, and they're older, 10 and 13. They read to me a little bit, or I'll have them read a little bit of whatever they're doing for homework out loud to me. Even if they're reading a graphic novel, a magazine, something, and do not let them read to you from their phones. They should have a book in their hand. I mean, that is reading, but the act of putting their device down and picking up something else is a habit you should really get them into.
And I heard an avid reader is a probably better writer.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's that connection.
So you learn how to write by watching author's craft in your reading. Whether you know that or not, you're absorbing it as you read.
And also to just remember to let their interests guide what they read. If it gets to a point where it's feeling forced by the parent, that's where you see, kids develop this, I don't want to read, when it's something that has to really be forced. So just remembering that anything is reading. They could read nonfiction about their favorite animal. It could be a story. It could be like page shared. It could be a graphic novel. So any sort of text where they're engaged and interested.
Yeah, and I think we just have to take a point to mention our Harford County Public Libraries and how great they are, and they've got so many interesting, engaging activities for kids, and I think that's something that I've always used as a parent that's been great, and free. Free is good, free is good. So thinking about the homework and so as a parent, sometimes you really just struggle with, okay, should I step in here and do it? Should I show them how to do it? Should I take a step back? I just really wonder at times, is what's too much, what's too little? Kind of that Goldilocks, right? Is it too much, too little? What's just right? How do we do that?
I think you should really look for a frustration point in your child. And when I say that, I don't mean let them stop when they become frustrated, because that's part of the learning process as well, working through things. But if it's getting to a point where they are so frustrated that they can't function, that it's causing an argument between you and them when they're trying to work through something, maybe a break, maybe go run around outside for a little bit. I do with my children. You get 10 minutes to do something on a screen and come back to it. Just take a break with it. It's hard. I know as a parent, it's very hard when you feel like your whole evening is homework, and it's causing an argument between you and your child, and then sometimes you and your spouse, because it just kind of permeates.
Well, you just want to fix it, right? You're just like, can I fix it? Yeah.
But if it's hitting a point where your child is so frustrated that they are not functioning, then that's a good time to reach out to a teacher, because no one is being productive. Homework should be about reinforcing what they learned in school that day, not about causing them such frustration that they don't want to go to school the next day. So that's a great opportunity for communication with the teacher. My child's spending 3 hours on their homework. What can I do?
Right, and is that normal? Right.
Is that normal is a great question.
Yeah, and do you wonder, so when a child shows up with a project that looks amazing, right? Like, for whatever reason, it just is perfect. Do you ever wonder, how much have mom and dad assisted with this one, right? Have you ever wondered? Yeah, so it's perfect isn't always best, right?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think part of the learning process is that struggle. Part of, you're not, I always tell my kids, in science, you don't erase the hypothesis, because a wrong hypothesis is part of the learning.
Oh.
So I think that would go along with the homework piece. You're not going to get 100% because it's practice.
Right.
And I think I have to tell my kids that, my own personal kids and my students, this is the time to practice what we're learning, and that practice time is really important.
Yeah, I would much rather, we definitely see a lot of projects as science teachers, and I would much rather see one that I know came from the student than one that looks like completely manufactured by a parent or store-bought. But with that said, I think it's also important to remember that, at least for me, the point of homework is to bring the content that you're doing at school home and make those connections with your life at home and the real world, I guess they say. So part of the reason for homework is to bring those conversations home. And so if you are finding you're hitting a wall with your kid, and you reach out to the teacher is going to see that, oh, this is great. They're actually having these conversations at home. They're talking about what we're talking about at school. And so, from my perspective, it's as much about keeping the family informed about the topics you're going over in class as it is the practice.
I would agree. I think the communication at home is really important. I think that's what homework does. It helps students build a deeper understanding of what is learned in school. So that should be a communication piece for the parent. I also think that there's some value into failing. I think that, we're trying to teach kids at the younger level that to fail is really your first attempt in learning. And that's okay, because that's going to help build up that perseverance
it's
and
just,
the motivation and not give up.
It's just so hard to watch them fail. It's just it's so hard, and you want to fix it. But I think that's a great lesson that is part of the learning. I think to what your point was, that's part of the learning. Wow. Something else that I think, speaking of failing and struggling a bit at times, is thinking about the classroom, and if you're seeing disruptive behavior in a child, is there a point where parents need to really assist with that at the home, right, to try to reinforce whatever you're trying to work on in the classroom? What's that communication like between classroom and home when you're starting to see either disruptive behavior or totally disengaged behavior, right? They're just totally kind of not even checking in.
I think it's really important to always start off knowing that you're a team. Like, you're not out to get the student's not out to, get the teacher, the parent's not out. It's a combined effort to make everything work. And I think it's really important to build positive relationships in the beginning, from the start. And that will help assist later on. But really know that you are working together as a team to make the classroom work. I think that's so important.
Well, and I think that's where that communication piece really comes in, because, if there's something going on at home that maybe is a little bit different to your routine, or you've had, some type of family trauma or something like that, letting your teachers know, make that contact with them, because then we're going to know, all right, we're going to, keep an eye out for this. Or if we see that behavior that's not typically characteristic, then we're going to go, all right, well, wait a second. There's something else going on here, and then we're going to communicate back and let you know that we're seeing things too, so that you can talk about it as a family. And again, it goes back to that partnership and that team and just communicating.
Well, and I think sometimes, again, it's that need to be perfect. So as a parent, you're thinking, I don't want to kind of share whatever we're going through, but you don't have to get into the details, right? Just kind of say there's something
we've
challenging
got some
going
stuff
on. Please understand, it's just not normal right now at home. So
it definitely changes the way that I look at a child when they come in my room, when I just know that they've got something else on their shoulders right now, and I'm going to make sure that I'm aware of it.
And also, we know as teachers that no one knows your child better than you. So if there's a strategy when, if they're angry at home and you found something that just seems to work, like, we definitely want to know, because some kids, it works best for them if they're upset to take a minute outside of the classroom and just have a minute to themselves, whereas other kids want to immediately talk through it. They're more the social kind that want to hash it out, and it's better to hear it from the parent and be able to jump straight to the strategy that works best for them, as opposed to trying everything and sort of fumbling through it. So I know I always appreciate that as a teacher when a parent says, oh, well, this kind of works really well for him or her, for my child.
And there's that consistency too then. If we're doing the same things to reinforce at school as are happening at home, or vice versa. I've had parents before say to me, what can we do at home? And then we could come up with a common strategy. That's huge, that the student knows it's consistent.
Well, and I think the other important part to that is, I think sometimes kids perceive, oh, you talk to my mom or you talk to my dad, and that's a bad thing. And it's not always a bad thing. We're communicating because we want what's best for the child. So it's okay to let the child know, like, hey, I talked to your teacher today, and this is what we talked about. Get them involved in the conversation, because I think you're going to get more buy-in from the child and realize that just because they talk to my teacher doesn't mean I'm always in trouble.
Right.
Yes.
It could be a positive thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which would be a good thing.
And I was going to say, one thing that I love about being in two schools is seeing the positivity that teachers work so hard to bring for the start of every child's day. Those kids come running in, they're smiling, they're high-fiving their teachers, and teachers work really hard to build that positive environment for the child to come into, and they might have a rough day, but believe me, the teachers truly, are a champion for your child.
That's awesome.
It is.
That's such good advice. The other way that we as parents get a kind of peek into what's going on is our home access center, right? Used to be Edline, not Edline anymore, and I think that's something we've all kind of had to get used to. So the home access center, or HAC, is what teachers reference it as. So thinking of the HAC and how often we should check it and should we get in, I know our younger grades don't have it, right?
Third, fourth, fifth.
Third, fourth, fifth. Okay,
third,
so first and second, it's really that conversation back and forth, but then we get into the HAC. And so thinking about that, how do we use that as parents as a tool? We talk about communication between the classroom and the home. How do we, I don't want to micromanage that either, right? Because that can cause stress. So how do we do that?
Please, with older students, parents, have your student be a part of the process.
Yes.
It shouldn't be a parent checking and saying, every day, and I checked your grade and this is missing. They should be a part of the conversation. They should be checking if there's a grade missing or there's something that needs to be dealt with the teacher. I highly encourage the student at the older grades to approach the teacher first, just to get them in the habit of those type of skills they're going to need in the workplace, to talk to their boss someday, to work, problem solve, work problems out. Always have the student have ownership over their grade. That's a huge thing. And everyone should have access to it too.
Right.
Every year I get about halfway through the year and some of my students say, I don't know how to get on there. So
Okay.
that should be something that parents are proactive about as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Another thing that's new, relatively new, is the way the product, process, and practice grades are done. And I've seen a lot of students and families feel they're hitting a point of confusion when a product grade goes in, which would usually be a test, a quiz, or a project, and the grade jumps from an A to can go all the way down to a C because it's 50% of the grade. So I think it's worth having a conversation with your kid about those percentages. That product is worth 50%, process 30, practice 20, and how that can kind of influence the grade, especially with the older kids when they're starting to kind of try to figure out how to track their grade, and they feel a sense of confusion that not every assignment is weighted the same.
And what's the process?
Process is usually something like, it's called process because it's showing the process of learning. So it could be a lab, it could be a group work activity that involved a discussion. It does vary from teacher to teacher, but it's some form of processing the information.
Oh, okay. And the last one was
Practice.
practice. Okay.
Practice is usually, most teachers grade practice more of a completion grade because it's just that, it's practice. So it's showing that the student is trying their best, they're practicing what they've learned. That's where you're going to see homework is always going into that category. And usually, assignments in class where they've already learned the material and now they're just kind of they're practicing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so the grading part of this conversation, right? So thinking about grades and the emphasis on grades and that GPA, any thoughts around grades and how do we?
I think, if the best that your child or your student can do is a B or a C, and
Right.
they are putting forth everything they have,
Yeah.
then that's amazing. Just because they don't have an A doesn't mean that they're not doing really, really well.
Okay.
So I think sometimes we over stress. My child has to have an A. My child has to have a B. And you have to take the whole piece.
Well, and sometimes they're taking a harder class. And so if
Absolutely.
they were taking an easier class and getting an A, then they wouldn't be quite as challenged,
Absolutely.
right? So maybe it's a good
Absolutely.
thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard. Again, it's hard to kind of say that as a parent, but
Well, and I think with it has to come that work ethic piece. So I know the philosophy on our own house is if you put all of the work and effort into it, the grade that comes home is what comes home. You know, we all, even as adults, we have those things where we set ourselves up and we did everything right and it just didn't work for whatever reason we had that day. Now, on the other side of it, if you're not putting the effort in, if you're not following through on the work, and that grade's coming home, then that's the grade you really have to have the discussion about.
yeah.
Because, you know, what could we be doing better in that case?
The biggest question with my middle schooler especially, did you do your best? Every single grade, whether it's an A or a not so A, that's the first question. And it's really about her learning too, to be honest with herself about, did I do my best? And is this truly what I deserved? Because maybe I should have done this or should have done that. That's a huge part in growing as well.
Yeah. And another part of growing is learning how to take a test. So I know that I've had, you know, with 4 children, I've had different approaches for my children on how to take a test. Thinking about that and the stress attached to that for some children, what are your thoughts around how to prepare? What are some things that parents can help their children do to get ready?
Well, I know at the elementary level, 3rd grade is the big year to start testing for state testing. So schools do a lot of positive reinforcement to help the child learn how to take a test. Have a good breakfast that morning of, get a good night's sleep, do your best. So I know a lot in 3rd grade with the grades and then the state testing coming in, the schools work really hard just to pep them up and have them not be afraid, because that's really their first
Well, because
year.
if you're panicking and taking a test, it doesn't work very well.
No, that doesn't. That doesn't.
Doesn't go over very well. But I've also heard, eating that good breakfast and getting that good night's sleep and all of that.
I think it's also important for us as teachers to test in different ways. Christy talked about product grades, and a lot of times I like to use class labs that we're doing, so they can show me the process and they can show me that they've demonstrated the learning. So I think it's important for us to not always do the tests that are just your multiple choice or your essay, but really shake it up a bit. You know, I think it's important for them to do when they're taking a test. That shows learning just as much as, maybe more, than just sitting down and
memorizing something and then
Absolutely.
saying it back, but that doesn't
Absolutely.
necessarily mean it was absorbed.
Yes.
That makes a
I
lot of
was
sense.
gonna, to that effect, like, you know, the age of having a word on a flashcard, a lot of times that's good if it's strictly a vocabulary test, but most of the time we're moving beyond that, and it's more conceptual ideas that you're really not going to be able to just put down on a flashcard and memorize it. And sometimes, you know, when students try to do that with something that's really more conceptual, it almost makes it harder. Like, it almost, sometimes you see that it almost makes it worse. So I feel like, at least for science and the subject that I have in mind, it helps to just talk with your child about how it applies to the real world. So, you know, for example, if we're going over the human body, that's our next unit, you know, and they're learning about bones. Remember the time your brother broke his arm?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's, you know, the osteocytes had to, if that was one of their vocabulary terms, the osteocytes had to rebuild themselves. And it's a good thing it didn't touch the bone marrow, because what's happening in the bone marrow? Right, it's making blood cells, and like kind of trying to take that content and interweave it to something they know to make it more sticky, I think is actually more beneficial than the flashcards.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Very, very interesting. Well, I just appreciate all of you so much and the wisdom that you give parents. And I know that your work every day is just going to impact generations. So I'm just honored to be with all of you today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today for the Parent Academy Real Talk. And remember, HCPS parents are students' first and best teachers.